Commander Varric Thornhill watched the alien delegation with a practiced neutrality that masked his growing concern. The Nelvari representatives, tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin that shifted colors with their emotions, currently displayed hues of violet and amber, indicating their skepticism and amusement. "So your species has never achieved unified planetary governance?" asked diplomat Ilzith, the senior Nelvari representative. Her skin rippled with azure flecks of what humans had learned to recognize as condescension. Different nations maintain sovereignty while participating in international organizations. Thornhill replied evenly. "It's a system that respects cultural diversity while facilitating cooperation." The Nelvari diplomatic corps exchanged glances, their skin synchronizing briefly in a pattern that the human translators couldn't quite decipher. 6 months into humanity's first contact with the Galactic Concordate, and these subtle communications still eluded Earth's representatives. Admiral Calix, the military attaché whose dark purple carapace gleamed under the meeting room's lights, leaned forward. "We find it curious that a species so fractured managed to develop fusion drive technology. The Concordate's threat assessment initially classified humanity as minimal concern, given your obvious technological limitations and disorganized governance structure." Thornhill bit back a retort. As the senior military representative for the North American coalition, he'd been warned about the Nelvari's tendency toward patronizing behavior. Earth's governments had united enough to present a somewhat unified front to the aliens, but internal divisions remained visible. "Perhaps we should discuss the Concordate's defensive capabilities," Thornhill suggested, changing the subject. "Our understanding is that the Concordate faces challenges with the Hraxian collective." Ilzith's skin flashed crimson briefly before settling back to a diplomatic blue. "The Hraxians are a minor inconvenience. Their tactics are predictable and limited by their ethical constraints." "Ethical constraints?" Thornhill asked. "All spacefaring species develop similar codes of conduct," Admiral Calix explained, with the patience one might use for a child. "Rules of engagement that prohibit certain weapons and tactics. The Hraxians, like all Concordate races, abide by these universal principles." "I see," Thornhill said neutrally. "And these principles evolved independently across species?" "Of course," Ilzith replied. "Any species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel naturally develops beyond the need for excessive violence. It's a sign of civilization." Thornhill nodded, but said nothing about humanity's own history of warfare. The briefing from Earth's unified command had been explicit, minimized discussion of humanity's military history until they better understood the Concordate's power structures. Later, that evening, in the secure embassy compound, Thornhill met with his counterparts from other Earth coalitions. Present were Commander Oriel Blackwood of the Afro-European Alliance, Colonel Taishi Matsuri of the Pacific Coalition, and Brigadier Rayansh Dhawan of the Southern Continental Forces. "They're underestimating us," Blackwood said bluntly, her dark eyes flashing with irritation. "They see our political divisions as weakness." "Perhaps that works to our advantage," Matsuri suggested, stroking his silver-flecked beard. "The Nelvari seem convinced we're technologically inferior and militarily irrelevant." Dhawan nodded. "Intel suggests the Concordate is struggling more with these Hraxians than they're admitting. They're looking for new allies, but they don't see us as equals." Thornhill gazed out at the alien cityscape visible through the embassy's windows, its architecture impossibly tall and flowing in ways that defied Earth engineering. "There's something they're not telling us about this conflict. The way they talk about ethical constraints and universal principles. It's as if they can't imagine warfare outside a narrow set of parameters." "So what's our play?" Blackwood asked. "We learn Thornhill replied. "We observe and we prepare, because if there's one thing humans understand better than most species, it's conflict." As they spoke, none of them noticed the tiny communication drone hovering outside the window, its sensors recording every word for transmission back to the Nelvari High Command. 3 months later, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The Hraxian collective had pushed deeper into Concordate space, destroying outposts and civilian settlements with increasing boldness. Desperation had forced the Concordate to accelerate humanity's integration into their alliance. Major Lysandra Koval, a hardened veteran of the North American Coalition's Marine Corps, found herself assigned as a military advisor to the Nelvari flagship, the Luminous Harmony. The massive vessel, with its organic-looking architecture and pulsing bioluminescent corridors, housed over 6,000 Nelvari crew members and now a small contingent of human military advisors. "Your quarters are acceptable?" asked Talvia, a Nelvari officer whose rank approximated a lieutenant commander. His skin displayed polite green patterns. "They're fine," Koval replied, her scarred face betraying no emotion. At 43, with service in 3 Earth conflicts behind her, she found the Nelvari's preoccupation with comfort amusing. "When can I observe your combat operations?" Talvia's skin flickered with hesitation. "Admiral Orvex has scheduled a tactical briefing in 2 cycles. The Hraxians have been detected in the Vexillus system." "I'd like to review your previous engagement records," Koval said, "to understand your tactics." "Of course," Talvia agreed, but his skin darkened slightly, "though I must warn you the footage may be disturbing. The Hraxians sometimes violate acceptable combat protocols." The disturbing footage turned out to be remarkably tame by human standards. Koval watched expressionlessly as Nelvari ships exchanged predictable salvos with Hraxian vessels, orderly, almost choreographed exchanges of fire that seemed to follow predetermined patterns. "They're targeting propulsion systems," observed Lieutenant Darius Ravencroft, a tactical specialist who sat beside her. His heterochromatic eyes, one blue, one amber, narrowed as he analyzed the footage. "And weapons arrays," Koval added, "almost never life support or command centers." "Is this normal?" Ravencroft whispered. Before Koval could answer, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Nelvari crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Koval noted a distinct lack of urgency that would have been present on a human vessel. "Hraxian squadron detected," announced a voice over the communication system. "Battle stations, prepare for standard engagement protocols." Admiral Orvex, a veteran Nelvari commander whose golden-hued exoskeleton indicated advanced age and status, acknowledged the humans' presence on the bridge with a curt nod. "Major Koval, Lieutenant Ravencroft, you may observe, but please refrain from interfering. Our tactical systems are calibrated to concordant standard engagement parameters. The space battle that followed was, to human eyes, bizarrely ritualistic. The Hraxian ships, angular constructions of dark metal and pulsing red energy, arranged themselves in formation opposite the concordant vessels. Weapons fire was exchanged in patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. "They're following rules of engagement," Ravencroft muttered, "like some kind of space jousting tournament." Koval's experienced eyes saw what the Nelvari did not. "The Hraxians are adapting. Look at their formation. They're protecting their propulsion systems now." Admiral Orvex's skin shifted to alarmed orange when a Hraxian vessel suddenly broke. Information accelerating toward one of the smaller Concordate ships. "They're ramming," a Nelvari officer cried in disbelief. That's prohibited." The resulting collision destroyed both vessels, sending debris spiraling through space. The Nelvari bridge crew's skin collectively paled to shocked white. "They sacrificed their own vessel," Orvex whispered. "This is unprecedented." In the stunned silence that followed, Koval exchanged glances with Ravencroft. The humans recognized what the aliens could not. Warfare was evolving right before their eyes, and the Concordat was unprepared for an enemy that would break the rules. As the remaining Haraxian vessels pressed their sudden advantage, Koval stepped forward. "Admiral, with respect, I suggest an immediate tactical reassessment. The Haraxians are no longer following your universal principles." "What would you suggest, human?" Orvex asked, desperation evident in his voice. "Let me show you," Koval replied, her eyes hardening with the cold calculation of a warrior who understood what these aliens did not, that in real war there were no referees. The aftermath of the battle left the Nelvari shaken. 3 Concordat vessels destroyed, with the luminous Harmony bearing scars from weapons that had targeted previously forbidden systems. Major Koval's quick tactical suggestions had prevented total disaster, but the psychological damage was done. Admiral Orvex convened an emergency council in the ship's strategic command center. Representatives from other Concordat species joined via holographic projection: the reptilian Eshkari, the crystalline Trivium, and the gas-based Morin, all displaying their species' versions of concern. The Hraxians have violated 6 principal combat conventions, stated Trivium Ambassador Prism, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns of distress. Such behavior has no precedent in 10,000 cycles of Concordat history. Major Koval stood at the back of the room, observing the aliens' disarray with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. Beside her, Commander Thornhill, newly arrived, from Earth as senior human liaison, watched with similar stoicism. "They wanted us to see this," Thornhill whispered. "See what?" Koval asked. "Their vulnerability, their rigid thinking. The Concordat needs us now, more than they realized." "Admiral." Orvex finally acknowledged the human's presence. "Major Koval, your tactical suggestions during the engagement saved many lives. Perhaps humanity has insights we lack." Koval stepped forward, her posture military perfect. "Admiral, the Haraxians are doing something that appears shocking to you, but is actually quite basic. They're adapting their tactics based on effectiveness rather than tradition. But there are rules to warfare," protested Eshkari General Threk, his scaled skin flushing with emotion. "Principles that prevent unnecessary suffering." "On Earth," Thornhill said carefully, "we developed similar principles, but they came after centuries of unconstrained warfare, not before." A horrified silence fell over the alien delegates. "You mean—" Orvex's skin turned ashen. "Your species fought without agreed-upon limitations?" "We fought to win," Koval said simply, "and then we created rules to prevent the worst excesses. But those rules exist because we know what happens without them." The Morin representative, a swirling cloud of sentient gas contained within an environmental field, pulsed with agitation. "Are you suggesting the Hraxians have discovered something your species already knew?" "I'm suggesting," Koval replied, "that they've realized the advantage of breaking your conventions, and they won't stop there." Over the next several hours, Koval and Thornhill provided the Concordat leadership with a carefully sanitized overview of human military history. They explained concepts like asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and strategic deception, ideas that visibly disturbed the aliens. "But this is barbaric," whispered Ambassador Prism. "It's effective," Thornhill corrected, "and if the Hraxians have discovered these concepts, you need to understand them too." Later, in a private meeting with just Admiral Orvex and his senior staff, Koval laid out the uncomfortable truth. "The Hraxians are experimenting with tactics you consider taboo. Based on their behavior, I believe they'll continue to escalate. They might target civilian populations next, or use weapons designed to maximize casualties rather than disable ships." "Why would they do such things?" asked Talvir, his skin now a sickly yellow. "What possible advantage is there in excessive violence?" "Terror," Koval said bluntly. Psychological impact. Breaking your will to fight. Orvex's gaze fixed on Koval's battle-scarred face. You speak from experience. I've fought in wars where both sides understood the rules and wars where one side didn't care about them, she replied. The Hiraxians have discovered that breaking your conventions gives them an advantage. They won't stop unless you either convince them to return to your rules or demonstrate that breaking those rules won't help them win. How would we do that? Orvex asked. Koval's expression hardened. By being prepared to match their escalation while offering them a path back to conventional warfare. You show them that breaking the rules won't give them victory, but following them might give them peace. As she spoke, Koval realized that humanity's darkest knowledge, its intimate understanding of warfare's horrors, might be exactly what the Concordat needed to survive. The Concordat High Command facility on Nelvar Prime hummed with tension. Representatives from 17 member species had gathered for an unprecedented emergency session. At the center of the vast chamber stood Major Koval and a small team of human military historians and strategists. We've compiled tactical assessments based on the Hiraxians' recent attacks, began Dr. Octavia Wolf, a diminutive woman whose expertise in military history belied her gentle appearance. Our analysis suggests they're systematically testing the boundaries of your combat conventions. Projected above them, footage showed Hiraxian vessels targeting civilian transport ships, a violation that had resulted in over 3,000 Concordat casualties. They're not just breaking rules now, Koval explained. They're committing what humans would call war crimes. The term required explanation. The Concordat's translation system struggled with the concept, not because the words were difficult, but because the underlying idea was so alien to them. You have a specific term for prohibited warfare tactics? Asked Trivium Ambassador Prism, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns of confusion. We have entire international bodies dedicated to defining and prosecuting them, replied Professor Tariq Mahmoud, a human legal scholar who specialized in laws of armed conflict. His salt-and-pepper beard and calm demeanor lent him an air of authority. The concept evolved because we needed to distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable conduct in warfare. But if everyone agrees certain actions are unacceptable, why would anyone perform them? Asked a Neshkari representative. Koval exchanged glances with her human colleagues. This was the crux of the matter, the fundamental difference in understanding that had left the Concordat vulnerable. Because, she said carefully, some combatants decide that winning is more important than following rules. Over the next several hours, the humans provided a clinical but unflinching education in humanity's long history of warfare. They explained concepts that horrified the Concordat representatives: strategic bombing, civilian targeting, psychological warfare, hostage-taking, prohibited weapons. These things you describe, said Admiral Orvex, his skin now a deep troubled blue, your species has done them all. And worse, Koval acknowledged. But we also developed systems to prevent and punish such actions. We learned from our mistakes. Why are you telling us this? Asked a Morin representative, their gaseous forms swirling agitatedly. Because the Hiraxians are following a pattern we recognize, explained Commander Thornhill. They're escalating, systematically testing your responses. They've discovered that breaking your conventions gives them tactical advantages, and they're exploring how far they can push. What do you suggest? Orvex asked, his voice heavy. Koval stepped forward. First, understand that conventional diplomacy may not work once this threshold has been crossed. Second, prepare your forces for tactics they've never encountered. And third, she paused, gauging the room. Consider that you may need to demonstrate strength in ways that violate your own principles temporarily to force a return to those principles. The chamber erupted in multilingual protest. The idea of deliberately violating their warfare conventions, even tactically, was anathema to many concordate species. When the clamor subsided, Professor Mahmoud spoke. On Earth, we learned that sometimes preserving the rule of law requires the capacity to meet lawlessness with controlled force, not to match atrocity with atrocity, but to demonstrate that breaking rules offers no advantage. Slowly, reluctantly, the concordate leadership began to grasp the terrible calculus that humanity had learned through millennia of conflict. Not all agreed with the human perspective, but none could deny the pattern the humans had identified in the Braxian attacks. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Orvex approached Koval privately. "Your species understands darkness we have never known," he said, his skin shifting to a somber grey. "I fear what we must become to survive." "The goal isn't to become like them," Koval replied. "The goal is to understand them well enough to bring them back to the table. Sometimes that means showing them that breaking rules won't give them the advantage they seek." "And if that fails?" Orvex asked. Koval's expression hardened. "Then you'll need to decide how much you're willing to sacrifice to preserve your principles." The Hraxian diplomatic vessel approached the neutral meeting point, a space station positioned in unclaimed territory between Concordate and Hraxian-controlled space. Its angular predatory design contrasted sharply with the flowing architecture of Concordate vessels. Inside the station's central chamber, Koval stood beside Admiral Orvex and the assembled Concordate representatives. 6 months had passed since the humans had begun advising the Concordate on warfare strategy. 6 months of difficult decisions, moral compromises, and carefully calibrated responses to Hraxian aggression. "They've agreed to talk," Orvex said, his skin displaying cautious blue-green hope. "Your strategy worked," Koval nodded. The strategy had been straightforward, but culturally revolutionary for the Concordate. Selective, precise demonstrations that breaking conventional warfare rules would not provide Hraxians with insurmountable advantages. The Concordate forces had not matched the Hraxians' atrocity for atrocity, but they had shown a new willingness to target previously forbidden objectives when tactically necessary. The Hraxian delegation entered, tall, chitinous beings with multiple limbs and compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling patterns. Their leader, war strategist Mordalek, moved with predatory grace. "Concordate representatives," Mordalek began, his translated voice carrying subtle harmonics of respect that had been absent in previous communications. "We acknowledge your request for dialogue." What followed was the most unusual peace negotiation in Concordate history. Rather than discussing territorial concessions or resource allocations, the primary focus was on re-establishing mutually accepted rules of warfare. "Your species has evolved," Mordalek observed, addressing Koval directly. "You were not like this when our conflict began." "We had help," Orvex admitted, gesturing to the humans. "Species who understood what was happening before we did." Mordalek's compound eyes fixed on Koval. "Your species knows war's true nature." "We know its cost," Koval corrected. "We learned through centuries of suffering that constraints on warfare benefit everyone, even the strongest powers." The negotiations continued for days. Human legal experts worked alongside Concordate and Hraxian representatives to codify principles that, ironically, much resembled Earth's own Geneva Conventions and laws of armed conflict. The difference was profound. These rules were being created with full awareness of what happened when they were broken. On the final day, as the treaty was being prepared for formal ratification, war strategist Mordalek requested a private conversation with Major Koval. "Your species is dangerous," Mordalek stated when they were alone. "More dangerous than the Concordate ever was." "Because we understand warfare?" Koval asked. "Because you understand darkness, yet choose light," Mordalik replied. The Concordat never faced true warfare before us. They created rules without understanding why they were needed. But your species, we created rules because we understood, Koval finished. Yes, and that makes you formidable. You know what works in war, yet you choose constraints, not from ignorance, but from wisdom. Mordalik's posture shifted. The Hraxian collective will honor this treaty not because we fear the Concordat, but because we recognize in humanity something worth respecting. Later, as the human delegation prepared to return to Earth aboard a Concordat vessel, Admiral Orvex presented Koval with a ceremonial rank insignia, a symbol of honorary Concordat command. Your species gave us something terrible and precious, Orvex said, his skin shifting through complex patterns of gratitude and reverence. The understanding of war's true nature and the wisdom to reject its worst excesses, not from ignorance, but from knowledge. Commander Thornhill, watching from nearby, smiled faintly. They underestimated us. No, Koval replied, gazing out at the stars. They underestimated what peace truly costs. Sometimes it's paid for with the willingness to fight in ways no one wants to imagine. As the ship accelerated toward Earth, carrying news of the treaty and humanity's new standing in the Concordat, Koval reflected on the paradox they had demonstrated to the galaxy, that sometimes understanding the darkest aspects of warfare is precisely what allows a species to choose a better path. The universe is a dangerous place, she murmured, but perhaps a little less dangerous now. Behind her, the view screen showed the receding lights of the neutral station, where representatives of 3 civilizations had taken the first step toward a more complex, more honest peace, one informed not by naivety, but by the terrible wisdom that only comes from looking into the abyss and choosing to step back from its edge.